My name is Spud. Everyone calls me that. I write under the pen name a.h.s. Boy. I don't really want to explain all my names. Just trust me that everyone calls me Spud. I'm 57 years old. I live in Baltimore, Maryland. I've been here about 30 years. I was born in Evansville, Indiana, but raised outside of Chicago. So I was raised outside Chicago in the suburbs. Nice small town, good public schools. My parents were divorced though, and my dad lived in Chicago proper. So I got some good exposure to city living. I had the comforts of suburbia for daily life and the adventures of city living on the weekends. So that was pretty nice. I was in a punk rock band in high school. So that was I was already essentially radicalized by the time I got to high school. We did put out a 7-track EP in the 80s. That was pretty exciting. I went to Indiana University for college. My grandfather had gone to law school there, and he was on the board of trustees. So weirdly, it was sort of the family school, but there had never been any pressure for me to attend there, and certainly not to follow any particular course of study. I had done a summer program in Bloomington, completely coincidentally, and this was when I was in high school, and it was a really great experience. I had a super enlightening experience that involved copious amounts of LSD, and I just decided that Bloomington was like, yeah, I could go to college here. So that's where I decided to go, which was nice. In retrospect, it was probably my first experience living away from home. And so it was just a really good experience. And so I decided to follow up on that. But it was also a relatively cost-effective place to go to school. Nobody had to go into debt to provide my education, which was nice. I worked in the cafeteria to pay for school and restaurant jobs and that sort of thing. I studied philosophy and political science. I knew that's what I wanted to study when I got in there. I had left high school already interested in those topics. And that's what I wanted to study. I had no eye for what I was going to do with a career if I had a degree in philosophy and political science. I really wasn't concerned with like preparing myself for a career. That was what I wanted to study. So I studied it. That was the point of school as far as I was concerned, not to prepare myself for a job. So I did that, and I had some great experiences in university. The first year I was there, IU had a pilot program where they basically took one class from each of the colleges, sort of the hard sciences, the social sciences, and the humanities. And they interconnected the curriculum. So 3 professors all worked together to develop a curriculum that talked about how each of their courses basically interconnected with the same work being done in other colleges. It's the kind of cross-disciplinary stuff that is sort of commonplace now, but it was pretty revolutionary at the time. And that was kind of, to me, that reinforced the worldview that I already had, which was sort of that all of this shit is connected, and you sort of need to analyze the whole system in order to have a really complete understanding of the way things work. Like I said, I had the benefit of not having parents that were driving me to have a specific career or to do something useful. I'm sure they thought that it wasn't particularly useful, and they may have been concerned about what I would do with my degree after I left, but they never applied any pressure on me, which was great. And sure enough, when I left, I just started making shit up. I knew I wanted to be in publishing, propaganda, dissemination of information, something along those lines. I thought maybe I'd be working at a magazine, and I have done that. I really didn't know what I was going to do, and I've been sort of making it up ever since then. So there you go. Upbringing, education, career. I give all credit to punk rock and the public library. I had an older brother, I had an older brother who was particularly savvy with innovative musical tendencies. So he was always sort of on the avant-garde of what was up and coming. So he got me into punk earlier than many people in America. And I took it to heart. I'm very lyrically based. So if I listen to music, I'm listening to the words. I have no musical talent whatsoever. So I focused on the words, and literally Johnny Rotten screaming, "I am an anarchist," kind of made me go, let's find out more about this. And where did you do that in the 80s? Not on the internet. So I went to the public library, the internet of the 1980s. And my public library had this great book, which is now out of print. I've never met anyone else that was influenced by it or even had heard of it. But it was called The Essential Works of Anarchism. And it was about 300-400 pages thick. And it started with an essay by William Godwin called Enquiry Concerning Political Justice. And I named my punk rock band Political Justice after that essay. But it also had essays by Bakunin, Kropotkin, Emma Goldman. I had stuff about Josiah Warren and the Time Store, just obscure anarchist history, essentially. And you got a little bit of everybody's theory. Max Stirner's egoism, Proudhon's, Proudhonism, Kropotkin's mutual aid. You got a little bit of everything in there. And that was my education. I was an avid reader, and I just absorbed that stuff. And it was less transformative than it was like, I felt like it reaffirmed things that I already believed intuitively. I don't know. It all made sense to me. I read it and went, yeah, well, of course. So that was really the background. That was my introduction to anarchism. And I was kind of alone. I didn't know any other, I didn't have an anarchist mentor at the time. So punk rock, there was a bunch of politics going on in punk rock. So that was a good avenue of expression. And then later in high school, there were some protests in the 80s called No Business as Usual. And they were organized, I think, by the RCP and other radical groups. And it was an interesting time in American politics because we didn't have any immediate conflicts in other wars. We weren't out there to protest a very specific American action. We were there because the people involved in the protests understood that the whole system was broken, that even the daily status quo, when we were not in a time of war, was an unacceptable position. And so I got involved in those protests. That was my first big protest. And it was interesting. It was exciting. It was and it also reinforced my belief that the problems we have were systemic, right? Not tied to a specific politician or a specific action that the US government took in one case. It was built into the whole system. So the status quo was unacceptable. And so that was my first big protest. That was still in high school. And then college came, and we had the anti-South African apartheid era. And I participated in anti-apartheid protests on campus. We built a shanty town in Dunn Meadow on the campus of Indiana University. And much like has happened with the pro-Palestinian encampments on college campuses in the past couple of years, we had problems. The administration, cops, strangers. The shantytown was firebombed at one point. Somebody threw military-grade tear gas canisters into the crowds. Basically, everything that's happening with the pro-Palestine stuff that happened to us in the anti-apartheid days as well. So there was that. I got out of that and eventually made my way to Baltimore a couple years after college. And one of the journals that I had read in Bloomington was called Social Anarchism, just a small independent political journal. I've been publishing since 1985 or so. And I realized when I got to Baltimore that the publisher's address for Social Anarchism was 2 blocks from my house. So I literally just walked over there one day and introduced myself. I met Howard Ehrlich, who was editor-in-chief of the magazine, and I almost immediately was enlisted to help with the magazine. Howard was eager and happy to have anybody come sort of assist something that he'd been doing for almost 10 years already, and he needed help. So I became an associate editor of Social Anarchism in the early 90s and did that for 10, 15 years. Howard passed away in 2015, and essentially the magazine died with him. We had never really successfully transformed it from a print journal to an online thing, which it really should have done in the early days. We did post some of it online, but it just never really became an online community. The roster of authors that we had were older and starting to die out, and we basically just never rejuvenated it. So keep hoping that one day I'll be able to revive some online form of social anarchism. But I did that. And then years later, the indie media movement got started, and Baltimore opened a chapter of the indie media phenomenon. And to do so at the time, you basically needed a website that was capable of publishing hyperlocal news on the fly, uploading pictures, video, whatever. Platforms like WordPress didn't exist yet. Most of the indie media sites were using software called IMC Active or something, or Active IMC, and it was terribly constructed software, and I was a software developer. So I took the opportunity to develop a new platform for online publishing that allowed us to run a news, like a hyperlocal news website with editorial approvals and public posting and comments and all sorts of things like that. Very innovative at the time. This was before the era of blogging, so that was kind of a big deal. So I was involved in that, and then that sort of petered out. There were a couple indie media sites left, but I really regret that didn't keep going. I think that was a really useful tool for keeping communities tied together, essentially, across the world. The software I ended up building was translated into like a dozen languages and used at IMC Japan and IMC Iran and Israel and Cyprus and all over the world. So that was kind of an exciting time for online news publishing. So I did that, and that kind of died out. Now, now we've got the sort of anti-Trump movement in Baltimore. We've got a group called the Baltimore Rapid Response Network that is trying to essentially coordinate, act as an umbrella for all of the various subgroups and protests that are going on against Trump and Doge and Musk. And I've been involved in that. There are too many things to mention. Anarchism in general, as may be evidenced by the fact that I participated in a journal called Social Anarchism, I would describe myself as a social anarchist, in the sense that I believe I lean towards communitarian anarchism as opposed to individualist anarchism, and certainly not libertarian, capitalist kind of anarchism. I am definitely communitarian socialist in nature, so I believe in workers' cooperatives and mutual aid and all of that sort of thing. I believe that anarchism spans the spectrum from direct interpersonal relationships to larger political movements and struggles. So I believe in worker cooperatives and trying to move to essentially regain the means of production and put it back in the hands of the people that are actually doing the work. But at the same time, I believe that our interpersonal relationships with people that we meet on the street essentially follow anarchist rules. When I talk to people that are unfamiliar with anarchism and that can't imagine a society organized along what they understand to be anarchist principles, I tell them to think of friendships they've had. I think friendships are the basic anarchist unit. You've got two individuals, each with their own subjectivity and their own perspective on things, that find a common ground for whatever reason to be friends. That doesn't mean they agree on everything. That doesn't mean they don't have disputes. That doesn't mean that they always spend time together. It just means that they've understood how to respect each other's individuality and how to work together in some cases towards a mutual goal. When your friend comes over to your house and is cold and goes over and closes your window because they're cold, you don't try to invoke some sort of law that prevents them from closing the window. You just basically respond to the situation like rational adults, have a conversation about whether or not the window should be open or closed, and come to some sort of resolution. To me, that's just anarchism in practice. It's just so banal that it's almost not worth describing as anarchism. But to me, that sort of decision making is the way you can do things on a larger scale in a way that would make society a whole lot more equitable than it is now. Yeah, but to me, anarchism, like I said, I read about it extensively when I was young and didn't know much about it and didn't have much experience in the political sector. And it just rang true to me. I read it and it felt comfortable. And so I basically just threw all my weight behind it. And I try to spend all my days convincing other people that it is a worthy strategy for organizing. And yes, I do consider myself an anarchist still. I do have a number of friends that I grew up with who would have considered themselves anarchists that kind of have drifted away from it for various reasons. Some of it just being political infighting amongst the anarchist community. I've always tried to avoid situations like that, getting so deeply mired in one particular genre of anarchism that I have huge arguments with people that are whatever anarcho-primitivists or something. I think the enemy is strong enough that if we can find common ground amongst all the different forms of anarchism, we should focus on that as opposed to our differences. And I still believe in that. I'm willing to participate in something organized by the RCP because I felt like we had common ground against the status quo at that point, and so I'm okay with that. I will absolutely disagree with anybody who believes that political change needs a somewhat authoritarian vanguardist movement to kick things off. So I've always shied away from anything that basically had too many sort of top-down organizational structures. So to me, I mean, literally, my core belief in freedom and the political struggle to lift everyone in society leads me to kind of a weirdly absolutist position when it comes to any forms of authority. So anything other than a strictly egalitarian anarchism essentially violates some form of that principle. So I'm an egalitarian above all. And I think that sort of throws me firmly in the anarchist camp as opposed to the RCP camp. Doesn't mean that I can't find common ground with them, but no, I'm an absolutist egalitarian in that sense. So the Situationist International was a this is the brief version, was a political artistic group, mostly based in France in the late 50s to the early 70s. The principal member is a guy named Guy Debord, who wrote a book called The Society of the Spectacle, which has been pretty influential in modern leftist, communist and anarchist analyses of society. It's not strictly a political analysis; it's a sociological, political one. But the group had come out of various artistic and politicized groups, sort of in the tradition of Dadaism, Surrealism. You had Lettrism before that, and then the Situationists came after that. And so they inherited a sort of radical artistic tradition, but they had better philosophers than the previous artistic traditions. So Guy Debord was just a brilliant writer, and very influential. Their work has basically been usurped and bastardized into sort of common media critiques, but they themselves were anarchist-adjacent socialists, essentially. I don't, strictly speaking, agree with their political philosophy entirely, but I think that the contributions that they made to modern political analysis, especially from a sociological perspective, is just absolutely invaluable. Every political radical of any stripe needs to be familiar with the work that they've done on the structure of modern society and the way we analyze our relationship with the media. And it's not just the Society of the Spectacle isn't just about media as a distraction, the sort of bread and circuses kind of thing, but it has sort of deeper philosophical meaning. And I just think it's a really important critique of modern society. Part of my involvement with that is that when the World Wide Web was coming of age in the early 90s, I was a very early adopter. And I started running a website from my apartment across a 33.6K modem, which means nothing to anyone that's born this century, but it was a very, very, very slow internet connection. And I wanted to run a website, and I didn't know what to put on the website to have a good excuse for it to even be there. And the Situationist International had the foresight decades ago to publish all of their works with no copyright. They understood that it was more important to get the expression out there than it was to capitalize on the intellectual property that they had produced. So I knew that I could publish that on the web and nobody would ever come and ask me to take it down because it had no copyright on it. So and frankly, at the time, works by the Situationist International were hard to come by. There were a couple translations in English that were partial, and a lot of it just wasn't really available in America. It wasn't widely distributed. So just by putting it up on the internet, I literally made it available to people that wouldn't otherwise have had access to it. Turns out a couple of years later, I noticed people coming to the archive and downloading texts, and they were all coming from Georgetown University addresses. And I went and looked and found that there was some media criticism class, and one of the curriculum items was go to this nothingness.org website and download Situationist texts for the next class. And that was because you couldn't get the text anywhere else. So literally it became a pretty valuable resource. And that was just another foray into publishing for me, which has, I think, been at the heart of most of my creative output, is somehow related to keeping information flowing. It's been really interesting. The landscape of anarchism, I feel like, has changed a lot in, let's say, 20 years. It's I think it's partly grown because of the growth of identity politics. and the influence that gender politics and things like that have had on the political landscape lately. Back when social anarchism was publishing in the 2000s, it was interesting. We specifically get like an essay by a Black anarchist talking about Black anarchism, and that was diversity in anarchism back in the day. And every once in a while, you might get some gay liberation politics in there or something, but it was definitely not as sort of queer friendly a space as it would be today. And I noticed that those people, queer people, are much more politically engaged at a sort of political level, and not just I'm gay and want to celebrate my pride level. Pride events to me are sort of political events in many cases, and so I think a lot more people are familiar with anarchism in certain subcultures that were not explicitly anarchist before, and that's great. However, I think the most important work being done in the anarchist sphere today is around worker-owned cooperatives. Part of my reason for saying that is because I'm in Baltimore and it's a really big thing here. There's a group in town called the Baltimore Roundtable for Economic Development that helps foster businesses to become worker-owned cooperatives and get grant money and get off the ground and do all that sort of thing. They offer workshops on how to start worker-owned cooperatives. There is a great worker-owned cooperative called Red Emma's in town that is a bookstore cafe that's been around for 10, 15, maybe 20 years in several different locations. And each time they switch locations, they've grown or somehow made themselves more stable. In the most recent iteration, they actually bought the building that they are housed in. So now they're no longer subject to a landlord that can change the rules of occupancy on them. But they've got a collective of, 12 to 15 full-time members, I think, that are worker owners. And it's a really good model. It operates like a normal business. It is well loved by the community. It acts as a hub for all sorts of political activity. The basement houses the Baltimore Free School, where you can basically teach a class on anything you want. They have frequent author events and community events, and activist groups meet there. It's just, it's an absolutely fantastic hub for the community. And it's organized on anarchist principles. And there's no good reason that other people can't do it. They've been spreading that throughout Baltimore. So there's a local ice cream vendor, Taharka Brothers, that just local people making ice cream. They reformed as a worker-owned cooperative. There was a pizza shop called Joe Squared. They reformed as a worker-owned cooperative. Coffee shop was going to go out of business, and instead the workers gathered together and bought the coffee shop and turned it into a worker-owned cooperative. There are dozens of examples of that happening around town. And that, to me, is one of the stealth ways that anarchism can essentially insinuate itself into people's lives, and they don't necessarily know that they are participating in or encouraging an anarchist enterprise, essentially. And I think we need more of that. I think that building alternate systems in parallel to the ones that we would like to replace is a great first strategy, so that we have the institutions in place to take the space of the things that we would like to replace. When it comes to religion, say, a lot of people get involved in churches not because they are super religious or Christian or have a really strong belief in their faith, but because they have a community that is associated with the church. They have people that will babysit their kids. They like participating in ice cream socials, whatever. It is, to them, it's a community. Happens to be organized around their faith or whatever, but we need to have more institutions like that. I think that are not religion and government based. We need to have community based mutual aid organizations. We need to feel like we can rely on our neighbors, and I'm seeing a lot of that happen with the ICE raids that are going on now. People are encouraging their neighbors to start standing up for each other, get in the way, put your body on the line, and I think that kind of thing is going to happen more and more. I was really hopeful, frankly, that one of the lasting outcomes of the pandemic, where we did see a resurgence of mutual aid and neighborhoods trying to essentially help each other out, and shutting down streets and making them pedestrianized and that sort of thing. And I was hoping we would see more of that lasting. I think a lot of the inroads that we made towards community building during the pandemic got swept away too quickly after the pandemic ended, and everybody went back to things as normal. And I didn't really want them to go back to normal. I wanted to keep pedestrianized streets and keep mutual aid groups working and all of that stuff. And I still think that has an important role to play, essentially community building, if not mass movement building. At a certain level, I'm absolutely willing to make coalitions, right? Coalition building is okay in my book. I'm not so absolutist that I won't work with people that, strictly speaking, adhere to every political belief I have. And frankly, at the level of protesting the current Trump administration and Doge and the way things are going right now, I have no problem whatsoever going out and protesting alongside, almost mainstream Democrats if they are opposed to the abhorrent things. Now, we disagree on acceptable solutions, perhaps, to the current situation, but we both agree that the current situation is untenable. And if your point is to go out and be a body that counts as one more person against the way things are right now, I'm okay if it's a mainstream Democrat sitting next to me. So I don't really have a problem with that. I would love to be in the situation where the minutia of our disagreements on strategies going forward are the biggest problems that we have to deal with, right? How are we going to restructure society once we have forced the government to collapse is a problem that you don't have until you're somewhere near having the government collapse. And there's a ton of work that needs to be done before that even happens. And so I'm more focused on getting that ton of work to be done. The other nice thing about working alongside people that don't share your beliefs is that that's your best opportunity to get more people that might share your beliefs but haven't been exposed to it yet. I know while I think radical politics is a little more available to people than it used to be in the 80s, so it's not quite so, I didn't even know anarchists exist, that sort of thing. A lot of people still don't know what it's all about. They don't know why they're not anarchists. So if you have the opportunity to talk to them about why you are an anarchist, you might get them to go, oh, well, I guess in that sense, I kind of agree with the anarchists. And to me, that's a win right there. I mean, I'll take that influence over people. So yeah, I don't really, I don't see our future being determined by the Democrat mainstream, but I'm pretty willing to talk to almost anybody to try to change their mind if they're willing to listen. If they're not willing to listen, fuck them. I'm willing to go to battle. But to anybody with an open mind, I'm happy to discuss it. I'm super rational. I love debating things, And I try to critically evaluate even my own positions. So I play devil's advocate to myself all the time. And so I hold myself and anarchist agitators to the same standards that I would hold anybody else to when analyzing their arguments.